Welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. John is the two-time national best-selling author of On Fire and In Awe. He's a world-class inspirational speaker, the host of the Live Inspired podcast, and he's the real-life inspiration behind the major motion picture Soul on Fire. Each week, John interviews extraordinary individuals about their life stories so you can more fully live your life story. Here's your host, John O'Leary.
Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. Many of you may recognize the name of the gentleman I'm about to introduce you to. And for those who don't, I think when you recognize his story, his testimony, his research, and his impact, you're going to be extraordinarily grateful you got to know not only his name, but a little bit more about his life and what it means for you today and yours. So his name is Dr. Claude M. Steele. He is a massively legendary social psychologist whose groundbreaking research on stereotype threat, self-image, and self-affirmation reshaped how we understand identity. It's a big deal. Claude's going to join us and share a little bit about growing up outside of Chicago in a racially diverse and complex environment. He was the grandson, after all, of a man who was born a slave, if you can imagine. He's going to talk about the values instilled by his parents. He's going to talk about how identity shaped his perspective. We'll discuss his acclaimed book. It's called Whistling Vivaldi and the silent weight of stereotypes, along with the subtle, powerful actions that can help dissolve them. My friends, if you want to better understand one another, if you want to reduce tension, if you want to make a difference in the world that right now is so divided and unlock the potential that exists across our differences, I think today's conversation is for you. So buckle up, grab your favorite Live Inspired journal and pen, cup of coffee or tea, favorite beverage of choice, lean in as I bring on my friend, now yours. His name is Claude Steele. Claude, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be here. Really been looking forward to this.
Man, you say it's an honor, but I've been not only reading your books to prepare for this, I've also been listening to just about every podcast you've ever recorded. And what I've known is the higher up you go in the academia circles, meaning when a real professor, a real leader, a real researcher interviews you, they feel as if they're walking on holy ground with you. Like they're blown away by you, by your work, by your worth, by the fact that you would say yes to them. And so the more I'm witnessing this and reviewing your work, the more I'm blown away you said yes to us. So Claude, you say you're honored, man. I really am honored to have you on. For those who have not read your books, or they may not have read a little bit of the work you've been doing over the decades you've been doing it, professionally, what do you do professionally?
Well, I'm a social psychologist. I suppose that's the first identity professional identity that I have, and I've been one for a long time at this point. What would it be? Probably 55 years, something like that. Long time.
Not everybody on the call knows what a social psychologist is.
Yeah.
Give us a little background on what that even means.
Yes, the first thing is I'm not a clinical psychologist, so I don't do therapy and don't have that training and that background. Social psychology is sort of that field between the disciplines that go, let's say, north of it, sociology, economics, and so on, and the disciplines that are below it, like biology and so on. We're looking at sort of the interface between the individual. How is the individual affected and shaped by their social context? I think that's so. The social context is in the mix. It's not psychology that is decontextualized and doesn't look at that. It tries to consider how does that context, families, schools, age cohorts, all those kinds of things. How do they affect psychological functioning?
In one of the conversations I watched preparing for this one, the lady who was about to interview you rolled out the red carpet and said that you are the Albert Einstein of social psychology.
Wow.
In hearing that, what do you say in
A little
response?
hyperbole there, I have to
I
say.
don't think so. She wasn't, there was no laughter from the audience. They were all nodding their heads in agreement. So how do you feel about this? Being known as truly one of the true greats in this field.
Well, at some level, it's deeply gratifying. I mean, everybody has an ego, and I have one too, and so that kind of thing is music to that little ego. But at another level, I think I've been very fortunate, and I think I've found the field a place that meant a lot to me personally because it enabled me to study a lot of the things that deeply interest me and have always interested me.
Mm,
And so I'm most grateful for that opportunity and
mm.
the structure it's given to my life.
So we're going to leave the degrees for a moment and the books and the research and the impact and the hyperbole of introductions from
Yeah.
others. January 1st, 1946, just outside of Chicago, there's a little boy born. In the year in 1900, I think, that little boy's father was born.
Hmm.
And in the year 1862, that little boy's grandfather was born into a time of slavery.
Yeah.
The journey that your family tree has been on in three generations.
Yeah.
Just reading, because that was part of the introduction of your most recent book. It blew me away at this journey. So
Mm.
we won't start with your grandfather or father, but let's start with you. Talk about growing up just outside of Chicago in the 1940s and 50s.
Yeah, I put that information in just to sort of give people a little idea of the scope of my background and so on. The other part of it in those same paragraphs is that my parents it was an interracial marriage. My mother's white. She was born in 1915 in Ohio, Ashland, Ohio. Her father owned a construction company there. So my parents, you know how it is when you're at an age when you get to be an adult, you wish you could have asked your parents things you never thought to ask them when when you
Yes.
were around them. And there's so many questions I would love to have asked both of them, how they got together and the like. They were really both involved in the civil rights movement. My mother had a college degree and was a social work graduate student at the University of Chicago. My father was a truck driver and really had no more than a third grade education.
Wow.
But I'd have to consider him sort of the intellectual of the family. I mean, he really um, he thought heavily in humanistically. It was a family. I think that uh, where that idea of human connection between people who come from very different backgrounds was an implicit foundation of our family life and our thinking and so forth. It's not that we talked about it like that, but it was just sort of a part of our assumptive world that
Mm.
there's something important about that you can see full humanity in difference, in different identities. That was sort of an implicit part of that experience. So that's one of the things that's why I kind of put that family structure in there is to sort of give credit to I think where it began in that family.
What was the most important thing that your father taught you?
Uh, Interesting. There's so many things that come to mind. It's hard to pick something. I do think this humanity. He was really in search of that idea. He had been a Baha'i, and he had been they formed an interracial, interdenominational Protestant church in a working class suburb outside of Chicago. That was a very important thing to him. Is that um, we do share this humanity. He had a lot of
Mm.
practical advice. He was a very practical guy, you know. I remember telling us, look, things don't have to be perfect, meaning, you don't have to have a world without prejudice in order for you to get a job, okay? So I just have the warmest, strongest love for him and for my mother. I think they were both. I think that's a good fortune a person can have in life is good parents, and I think I really
Amen.
did that.
You mentioned your father taught you humanity among a million other lessons. What was the most important lesson your mother taught you?
She was a forceful thinking person, a forceful personality. I could see her get things done. and she was practical. She was a Midwesterner, and
Yeah.
she faced things straight ahead and was honest and kind of had a knack for being that way in a big variety of situations. And I could sort of appreciate that even as a kid,
Mm.
that dealing with a pretty large range of people from very different kind of backgrounds. She could be herself. She was kind. She was thoughtful. She was extremely helpful. I mean, that was she had a kind of service mentality
Yeah.
toward her community and her friends, and she was beloved for that reason.
Claude, you grew up, your father was a truck driver, and yet his son wanted to become a dentist.
Yeah.
Why did Claude Steele want to become a dentist of all professions?
Well, it's a trivial story, but my dentist was named Claude. And I remember as a teenager, he had a very beautiful wife who was this nurse. So I thought I had to two and two together. This can't be a bad life. So that's about as deeply as I got into that question.
I love the fact that a man who is such a deep thinker, and my listeners, friends, family, viewers, I promise you, we will unpack a little bit of the real research here in a moment.
Yeah,
But the reason I love your story is just how human and ordinary it is.
yeah,
It
yeah.
just,
Very ordinary. There you are as a teenager, you're 14, 15 years old, and this dentist has your name, and he seems to be living this wonderful life.
right.
So for those reasons, it appealed to me.
You've been spending a lifetime now studying identity. When did you become aware that your identity changed how you saw the world, but also how the world saw you?
Yeah, well, I certainly I knew at my age, I grew up when America was still quite segregated as a society. So that makes you aware that of an identity that being black is an identity with some significance tied to it. I can remember as a kid trying to get jobs to make money. You can't be a caddy on that golf course, and you can't do this, but you can do that. And you're learning, well, what you can and can't do
Yeah.
because you have this identity. You don't really know why people in the world is arranged in that way. And you think about that a little bit, but your main upfront task is to figure out how to navigate those constraints and those opportunities and put a life together.
Mm.
I just think out of the struggle of growing up and figuring out where you belong and how you can function and so on, you perhaps especially as an African American of my age, you are aware of an identity and having to navigate a landscape of constraints and I would also say opportunities because of that identity. Something separate from your personality, something separate from your preferences, something that not everybody in society had to contend with, but you knew you did uh, because of the way society was arranged around identity in those days. So I think it was always an implicit part of it. I don't think I had much awareness of it in a
Yeah.
big way, just a passing awareness of it. I remember getting turned down to be a caddy for that reason. And it was made very clear that's why they were not going to hire me. So incidents like that really galvanize that awareness. So this is how the world responds to that identity. And that's where my parents came in, and I think were very supportive and constructive about that. They didn't want us to identify with those experiences, and just they wanted us to appreciate the truth of it and to see it as a real challenge in your life, but to keep pushing forward, not to let it defeat you,
Mm.
to find a way of functioning and a future for yourself that would allow you to have a good life. So they were optimistic in a way and supportive in a way. And this is where maybe my mother comes in. She would explain things to the point where you you say enough already. I think I got it. But that's the way they responded to those experiences, and our family culture embodied those wisdoms and strategies, And I think that has turned out to be a gift.
It is a gift
Yeah, it's a gift.
to not hide from it, but also not to ultimately to be defined
Yeah,
by some catty master's inability to recognize the beauty of the child in front of them.
yeah,
That like their decision on you doesn't inform and decide the value of your life.
yeah. I think I was fortunate to have come up in the era of the civil rights movement because it was conceived in its early phases. It was a very inclusive movement.
Yeah.
Probably almost 50-50, blacks and whites, and played big roles. Whites gave up their lives in that movement. And so there was in that movement and in my family's connection to it and in the family culture, this value of seeing humanity across difference that we celebrated differences. We recognized the significance and importance of identity differences and the different cultures and the like. But it was in the spirit of, wow, isn't it amazing how different human beings can be and how
Hmm.
many different manifestations humanity has? And isn't this fascinating? And can't I learn from that? And isn't that one of the major resources of our society? And it was in that kind of spirit that I grew up and in a sense, probably at this age, it's why I wanted to write this book because this is kind of the spirit I wanted to pull through
Yeah.
and to offer it to American society in a more formal way. But its roots were in that family.
You majored in psychology. You go on from there. I think your first job teaching is maybe in Salt Lake City. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. You did your research.
That Salt Lake City today is a pretty conservative in some regards, pretty white culture. You were there in the late 60s, early 70s. What was that like for you as a young professor in Salt Lake City?
It was my first academic job, and I loved the people in the psychology department, and we had some really good friends in Salt Lake City. But it was, especially in that era, that's before the Mormon Church had a revelation that really included African Americans as fully human and fully participative in that religion. And so it was a weighty life living there. Not a lot of people would rent us a house, and we eventually a faculty colleague knew somebody who knew somebody, and that's how we got a house to rent. And so it was an uncomfortable thing. Our daughter was born 5 days after we arrived there. With great good fortune, I got a job at the University of Washington in Seattle, and we were very happy to take it because it was just a less blanketed life than the life we were living in Salt Lake City at the time. It was a
Mhm.
beautiful city. I think people don't appreciate the beauty of that city. It's one of our most beautiful cities, I think. But at that time, this is not, I haven't been there. What would that be? 50 years.
Yes.
So this is not a characterization of it now, but it was a bit weighty for an African American from Chicago to make a life there.
Well, you made a life in Seattle. Then you made a life in various cities around the country and some of the finest universities. I won't even brag on them, but it is like the places where an academic would want to be is where you found yourself and where you found yourself ultimately leading. A
Yeah.
pretty remarkable thing. I'm going to jump though out of the university system and into you writing books. The first book that I read from you is called Whistling Vivaldi.
Mm. Uh-huh. You read
Interesting title.
that.
Tell me,
Yeah.
tell me about the name.
Yeah. The name is from a story of a journalist, Brent Staples, who is a friend of mine. And when he was a graduate student, he's a big guy, and he was a graduate student at the University of Chicago. And when he walked down the street, as an African American in Hyde Park at the time, he could recognize that, people perceived him as possibly maybe a menacing figure. They'd hold their purses and they might avoid him and they wouldn't make eye contact. And so he realized he was being seen through the lens of a negative stereotype about African Americans as possibly a menacing, dangerous guy, and that they should be careful. That's how they saw him. And it was new to him. And incidentally, he was trying to learn how to whistle in a sophisticated way at the same time. So he started going down the street whistling Beatles tunes and Vivaldi. And when people heard him do that, it dissolved the stereotype that they were seeing him through. They could see, well, he's not the menacing guy that I
Mm,
worried about. And they would be friendly. They would relax, and he would relax, and they have more, standard civil interactions with each other. So it illustrated to me as I got this story from his autobiography. It illustrated the phenomenon of stereotype threat, that what's it like to be possibly being seen through the lens of a negative stereotype about your group? You kind of have some sense of it, the way they respond to you and the like. And what happens when that dissolves? You do something like you whistle Vivaldi, and then they stop seeing you that way, and it's a
right.
whole other relationship goes forward. So that was what we were researching for years, and that's what was I was writing up in that book. So I couldn't resist using that title because it kind of captured the essence of what we were studying at the time, this
Mm.
phenomenon of stereotype threat.
I'm curious. So I'm going to have you spend a little bit more time on that idea.
Yeah,
When I was a little boy about to go back to school, I'm in a wheelchair at the time. I
yeah.
was burned about a year before this, scars on almost my entire body other than my face, and I'm missing my fingers on both hands.
Mm.
And my father says to me the night before I go back, John, you can be a victim or a victor. And he says, if you want to be a victim to this, have at it. And then he goes, everyone will understand that you've been through the worst and they will respect the fact that you endured anyway. And then he said, or you can be a victor. And every room we roll you into or one day you walk into, people will be in awe at what you've overcome in the life you lead. He said, victim or victor, your choice, not mine. My dad kissed me and walked out of that room.
Wow.
That was a conversation 38 years ago with my dad,
Yeah.
which informs every room that I walk into even today. I recognize if I want right now, I can be a victim to my circumstances and be seen as being less than, or I can whistle when I walk into the room
Yeah.
as a speaker, as a human, as a guy going through TSA. And for the most part, people will be impressed at the life I live. And so all of that background story to ask, how can we tell if the stereotype is in our head of how I think you're looking at me for being a burn victim and not having fingers and I walk with a limp and poor me? Or no, no, no. It actually is, John, how that room is looking at you as you walk into the room. So to me, I'm just curious, like, how do you know
Yeah.
if it's the mindset going on in your headspace or if it's the room around you and that's informing how they see you and now how you feel about yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, boy, your father sounds a lot like my father.
My father was tough, man. I know your father served and it just, they were equally great men.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, let's call it a fatherly speech. We
Yeah,
we got versions of it around it. The whole idea of being a victim was I like the way you put it. My father, like your father, would say, you could do that if you want to, if you want that kind
correct.
of life, but you don't have to. And his confidence that we didn't have to, in the face of these experiences where you were really being discriminated against based on your identity, that was such an empowering frame for it. So I so appreciate the wisdom of a father and a mother who had that idea about things. You could make this your life victimhood, or you could make this something that you're proud of and that people recognize that you're a human being struggling. All human beings struggle.
Right.
That's what people will respect and give you love based on that. So that speech was a common one in our household as well, and it's something I think we've lived by. Push, push against those things. Don't become a Johnny One Note where that's all you talk about or bore people with. Be open, and people will begin to see
Yes.
those stereotypes don't hold, and that you can have relationships, take on careers. If you were committed to the victim view, you'd never do. I think that that really did have an impact on the children in my family, um, as it has had on you. Look at you. Look what you've done.
Well, shoot, man. I don't have any letters behind my name, my
Well,
friend. So and I've traveled a little bit beyond the Gateway Arch of St. Louis, where I call home and still do. You've traveled the world in a mighty, meaningful way, impacting quite literally millions of lives and changing the study of psychology. It's quite a ripple effect. And you learn that from a truck driver who is the son of a man born into slavery.
Yeah.
It's just that's remarkable.
Yeah,
Uh,
I know one of the things I'm proud of, and I think one of the things that African Americans are often proud of, is how much we've struggled and how much we've overcome in a pretty short period of time. In a few generations, there has been a huge amount of progress. If you think of history in its correct way to think about it,
right.
it is a pretty short period of time when there's been a great deal of transformation in American society. I also think there's been a great deal of transformation, not just among African Americans in American society, but all Americans have grown in a way with regard to our differences and the nature of and the diversity of our population. I think we lead the world in our appreciation of what that of the significance of that and in our understanding of it. So I think there's a lot for all Americans to be proud of in how groups have risen and thrived. Not that there aren't challenges still here. There really are some significant legacies of of the way society was organized around identity in the past and in the current day as legacies of that past. That past is not totally past. But I do think one way to approach thinking about these things is to give ourselves a little credit for having taken that on. Most
Mm.
societies haven't. And so I think that we're distinctive as a society in having stepped up to that challenge and changed things. And we're still struggling with how to make that work in a yet better way. But I think we should start from a base of confidence in the character of our society to take on its deep human challenges.
What a positive way to frame the entire conversation we're about to have going forward. We're about to unpack the book Churn, which I am incredibly impressed that here you are nearing 8 decades into this world and you're still cranking out really meaningful stuff. And I think the timing for it is spot on. But before we turn into Churn, though, one of the things from the former book is you talk a lot about positive affirmation,
Mhm.
which sounds so eh,
Yeah.
self-help. Like platitudes, should we just put little signs up on the wall like you are special today? Like is that what we're talking about here? And yet your research and then it's played out again and again and again in the data is no, there's a place for this and it matters. We just help us understand that a little bit, please.
It's a good question because I remember worrying about you when writing the theoretical work that went into that self-affirmation theory. I can remember being very self-conscious about using the term self-affirmation. At the time, there was a Saturday Night Live,
Stuart Smalley.
yes, Stuart
Every
Small.
time I ran through it, I'm like, man, Stuart would love this.
Yeah, yeah. So self-affirmations have been very effective in getting in this the research you refer to in improving minority students and women in math, improving their academic performance, their progress, and so on. I think that what the mechanism by which that happens when you allow a person to affirm themselves, and the way that research does it is to just give a person an opportunity to tell somebody, well, these are the things I value about me.
Yes.
And these, little kids just take 20 minutes and they write these poignant things. Oh, my aunt really believes I can sing. And my uncle really, he spends time trying to improve my free throw shooting. And they just want the teacher to know that,
Yes.
that affirms them. They feel like then they're not going to be seen just in terms of those negative stereotypes out there about their group.
Yes.
And now you know the real me and what I really value. And so I think that frees them up in the environment so that the self-affirmation, the exercise of doing that, of writing for the teacher a little essay about what they want the teacher to know about them. Once they kind of do that, they feel, okay, I'm not going to be seen in that way. I'm kind of free of that pressure that might otherwise be here. If she never said anything or let me tell her who I was,
Mm.
then I can't be sure that I don't know whether she'd see me stereotypically, but she might. And I start to churn about that. I worry about that. I stew about it. I'm distracted by it. It can affect my ambitions in the situation, the strength of my motivations, the degree to which I'm going to identify with school as something important to me. That's the psychological chain of events that make that affirmation something that has an effect that you'd almost never expect from it. That a simple opportunity to affirm themselves in the eyes of their classmates and of their teacher in an essay, or maybe the teacher allows them to tell a little bit about who they are.
Right.
Then to have that kind of an effect is surprising, and I think it speaks to the pressure they are feeling without that opportunity. If they don't have that opportunity, then they worry. I'm not sure how I'm going to be seen here. Even if I do well, that could be seen as the exception to the rule. And my failures and frustrations, they could be seen as the rule. That's kind of what the stereotype might lead people to do, even though they're not even that aware of it. So this little intervention, it sort of changes their mindset toward that situation where they're free of that and they're able to more directly engage the work at hand and to identify with it, to take it on as a personal identity. I think that's one of the
Mm.
major challenges in education is for students to take that on as something that's theirs, not something forced on them, not something that they're obliged to do, but to ultimately grow into it being a part of who they are.
Honestly, I could spend another entire episode just talking about that. I'm blown away at the research. I remember you shared about the math and how there was a test that was being given where women would do poorer on it than men for no real reason. Like
Yeah,
mathematically, academically, intellectually, they ought to be the exact same. And yet there was always a gap. And so then you did some research where you would begin, but before giving the test with the words, you may have heard that there's a gap between what men and women score on tests, but you should be aware on this test that is not true. Not on this test. And then you would give out the test, and it would, in fact, come to pass that
yeah,
there would be no gap on that test once the women knew there was no difference, that they were equal and up for the task of the men in the room. And it sounds so minor, it sounds made up, but you
yeah.
proved it out again and again and again.
Yeah, yeah, no, it was that research that kind of gave us some confidence that this part of people's psychological functioning, especially in schools, we were focused on that. Now I would like the ideas to generalize to the workplace, to the military, to athletic teams, but it began in thinking about school performance and the like. I'm not sure, whether women are under the same kind of stereotype pressure in those areas today that they were then. I do think in the really advanced high level STEM work, there can still be those stereotype pressures on women where they could worry that any frustrations as they're working on difficult things, sort of at the frontier of their skills, and they're having the normal frustration that would go with that, they could have the additional worry that a man would not have. They could have the additional worry. Is that stereotype true? Or are people
Hmm.
seeing me that way? Am I what's going that churn, that distraction could still happen. It does happen to African American students too. When you make the task relevant to the stereotype, that is, you tell, let's say, in the case of African American students, you say, this is a test of intellectual ability. Well, they know that stereotype about their group's abilities. They know it. So when they experience frustration on that test, what does that mean? Are they confirming the stereotype, or is their teacher going to see them in terms of that stereotype? They're churning. And if they're churning right in the middle of taking the test, that's going to cost them. They're probably going to not perform as well. But if you make the same test not relevant to the stereotype. As, for example, you just gave one of the instructions we use to do that. But you say, this is not a test. This is just a laboratory test. It's a game. It's not diagnostic of
Right.
anybody's intelligence. Oh, whew. Now they're not under that pressure of confirming that negative stereotype about their group's abilities. That's gone because I'm just playing a game. This is Monopoly. And in Monopoly, I'm in.
I lose every time, so I don't want to talk about Monopoly. You'll need to use a different board game if we're going to talk board games. You've used the term 4 times now, and now you wrote a book about it, so I should ask you what it means. Churn. You use a slightly different definition than I probably would have used. So tell me what your definition of churn is, and why does that matter to the world right now?
The shorthand version of the definition, I think, is churn is just simply you are in a diverse situation, different kinds of people, different backgrounds, and it's an important situation to you. If you're just sitting on a subway or in a bus and there are different kinds of people from different backgrounds, so what? You hardly pay any attention to it. But if it's a doctor and a patient, if it's a police officer and a pulled over driver, if it's an athletic team, if it's a boardroom, if it's a classroom, as the situations are important like that, I know that I possibly could be seen in terms of some negative stereotypes about one or another of my identities. Could be my race, it could be my age. So I know all of a sudden that I could be seen that. I don't know that I am, but I could be, and the situation is very important. And so I start to worry, well, how will I be treated here? Well, how should I behave? What should I say? How should I say it? Will I be treated fairly here? Because based on my identity, and that's churn. It's just the experience of being in a diverse situation that is very important to us. We can worry a little bit about how our identity is going to affect our experience there.
When you wrote beautifully that it's not just the African American young man walking down the street, it's also the police officer that's having the encounter with him.
Absolutely.
It's not just the student who's struggling with biracial parents. It's the white third grade teacher who's doing her very best to love that child and love the family, but now she's mincing every word very carefully
Yeah.
rather than just authentically speaking truth and being honest in the conversation. So the
Yeah.
churn isn't one-sided, so to
Oh.
speak. It affects all of us.
I'm glad you stressed that because that's one of my primary motives for writing Churn is that Whistling Vivaldi, it was focused on looking at stereotype threat on the performance of women and groups whose abilities were negatively stereotyped in society, African Americans, Latinos. And so people were just thinking of stereotype threat as something that those groups experience. But it's so clear that we all experience it in a
Mm.
diverse situation. I begin the book with a prologue, a story about a parent-teacher conference. So it's a seventh grade kid, the young man, African American kid, and his parents. He's in the seventh grade, and the parents are preparing to go to a parent-teacher conference with the teacher. They know the stereotypes about African Americans, and this conference is important to them. This because it's a chance to explain to the school why they shouldn't see their kid that way. They should really invest in the development of his abilities and so on. And so as they get in their car, they're kind of they're churning. What kind of teacher is this? And how does she approach this? Is she comfortable talking about the realities of race or is that difficult for her? What do we? So they walk into the room and they're both in full churn. They don't know that the teacher is using those stereotypes. They certainly don't know that. They don't want to believe that she is, but they can't be sure that she isn't. And so there they are in churn. The teacher, she has probably an equally intense form of stereotype threat there or identity threat. She's worried as she prepares for this conference that she views herself as so committed to the welfare and the development of all of her students, and she tries to be maybe especially concerned about the needs of minority students in her classroom, and she works really hard to learn about that and to be as effective as she can be about it. But how can she just tell the parents that? She can't tell them that directly, and she worries that if she says something that's even slightly critical, she might be seen as in terms of the stereotype about her identity that is relevant in that situation was this maybe she's a racist.
Mm.
And that would just be so painful to say something that inadvertently would get her tagged that way. So here, both parties are entering this conference, this meeting with these threats.
On eggshells.
Yeah, on eggshells. There's tension in the room, and it's not about how prejudiced they are. That's an important thing to stress here. And prejudice is an important phenomenon indeed, but that's not. This is something different than that. This would happen to both parties, whether they're prejudiced or not.
So,
It,
Claude, I'll share a personal story and then say, so what do we do about this? All right, so here's my story on this, and there's a million I could draw from, but while you were elaborating that answer, I am a speaker and had an opportunity of speaking at a virtual conference basically during COVID. So lots of folks from all over the country, all different kinds of background, raising money for kids who struggle academically from basically people of color. All right. So just it's a very diverse, beautiful community that I'm part of. And this young woman did an introduction of what this group is really all about. She went on for about 6 minutes. And then it was my turn. And I began my speech by praising this young woman. And I mean, like, sincerely, off the cuff, lifting her up and edifying her and talking about people who fear for our nation. I invite them to come here and listen to what we just heard right there. And then I said, it was the most articulate introduction I've ever heard of our mission.
Mm.
And then I went on to my thing. Well, that one word, um, had a triggering effect, not only on this girl who did the introduction, but on a whole lot of other folks on the call. And they wanted me to come back in and apologize for using such a racist term as articulate when I was celebrating this young woman.
yeah.
And if I can't speak from my heart praising someone without risking profound offense, I told that group I won't do it again. I'm just not going to put myself out there if we are going to be on these types of eggshells all the time. And so I apologized to the girl, explained my heart. Didn't seem like it carried much weight. But how do we have these conversations in a world that lives on eggshells?
The book tries to explain what the eggshells are, and that's maybe the darkest part of the story. I was just trying to do that with that example of the parent-teacher conference, that they're both worried about how they could be seen when they're with their own group. They know they're not going to be seen in terms of those bad group images because everybody's got the same image. So you relax, the pressure's gone. But when you diversify, when you integrate, whatever
Yeah.
term is, then you all of a sudden one part of your brain says, I could be seen this way. I could, just as you're describing, I could use the wrong vocabulary and so that they just today decided is the wrong vocabulary, and then I'd be seen as a racist. My God, that's the diagnosis. The best answer that I can come up with is if that teacher and those parents had built a reservoir of trust with each other, then that kills the churn. And I think a lot of us has that experience with, we have friendships that are across identity divides, and we feel comfortable with those in those friendships
Yes.
because we know and trust each other. We trust each other's intentions, and we trust, so if somebody makes a mistake, well, okay. But I know this guy's we're really friends. He doesn't really, he's not using that to judge me. That's just, I can remember once a really good friend of mine, we were colleagues, and he was telling me a story of having grown up in San Francisco, and and he's fulminating about this story. Yeah, we were a gang from the Noe Valley, and we get on our bicycles and we would ride over to the Embarcadero, and then we'd see the Irish come up, and then we'd see and he used the N word inadvertently. I mean, I loved him and he loved me, and we just laughed it off. But because there's trust there. That's the best orientation toward getting us out of these tense situations. I'm trying to argue is that we need to focus on building that trust.
You,
That's an unrecognized, underappreciated route to making differences and diversity work, and allowing ourselves to be comfortable with it and to even enjoy it
mm,
is to focus on developing that. In the example you give, it's hard to say because how could you develop trust so instantly like that? I can give an experiment of some things that will help very quickly give that trust, and I
please.
can give examples of it. But trust is sort of the story takes an optimistic turn at that point, that we can all build this trust. Trust is something that I think we understand intuitively pretty well. It's listening to people and listening and then collaboratively trying to figure out what people need and to help them get that. When people see you do that for them, they don't really care about the differences. And I think there's something more fundamental that holds us together as in communities. And the book is focused on concrete, on our lives in our workplaces and in our classrooms and the real life settings. And that's where we have an opportunity to build that kind of trust that I think sort of diffuses the churn in the situation, relaxes us, enables us to just be really comfortable with each other. You know and love baseball, and there are a lot of baseball teams where those guys, race is not the issue for them. And they work together, they travel together, they
Well, it's ironic you bring that up because a baseball team may be the mo most diverse team out there. It's far more diverse than the NFL or basketball.
yeah,
You have people from various countries, different languages,
yeah,
different passports. You have folks who were born in a city and folks who have never been into a city until they were drafted by the ball club. And they all somehow come together, these 25 random dudes, and
yeah,
they row in one direction if they do it right.
yeah. If
And they
they do it
figure out how
right.
to get along through the differences. It seems
Yeah,
like so. Let me ask that question. In a nation, because so many of our listeners and viewers are coming in from the United States,
yeah.
in a nation that feels so divided, and so kind of at a tipping point of we're an inch away from the next explosion, whatever that thing is. We don't even know yet, but it's on the horizon.
Yeah.
What gives you hope that the foundation's more firm than we may even recognize and that the best is yet to come?
Okay, well, I do have that faith. That's the first thing to say. I really do believe people want to be able to get along with the full diversity of people who are in our society, just like that baseball team wants to get along with everybody on that team and make the team work well together. That there is that desire there. I want to characterize us that way. And then I think the opportunity to be with each other. One of the reasons I also was interested in writing Churn is that I think Churn, the worry about it, like that school teacher in that example, I maybe just I don't want to go to that diversity training. All they're going to do is beat up on me in there, and you know, that just won't be pleasant. And
Right.
what can I get out of that? I think we're at a point in our society where on all sides we're complaining about this divisiveness and this alienation from
For
each other.
sure.
And it's getting to be a disturbing feature of American life, this divisiveness. I do worry that this is maybe a bit of an aside, but I do worry that the language we sometimes use and that our leadership can use in public is just too dehumanizing.
For sure.
People
On both sides of the aisle. It
in
is
both, yeah,
the hate speech is alive and well everywhere right now.
yeah. And the cost of it is really this insecurity we have with each other at this point. So I suppose the book is a call for a reorientation, a different mindset toward each other. I have some good examples of that, I think, in the book, and then how to do that,
Yes.
how to learn the skill of doing that. I use the term wise. It was a term that came out of research in the 50s of the gay community in San Francisco, which was at the time especially stigmatized community. And gay men in that era had a term for straight people who saw their full humanity, who appreciated that they were gay, but that they were fully human.
Of
So
course.
they would say, "Oh, he's wise, man. He's wise. He's wise." African Americans have this kind of terminology that, "Oh, he's cool, man. He's cool. He's down. He's down." Me, meaning he's a white guy who knows we're really human
Right.
and sees that and connects to us that way. So I think at the level of individual, that mindset is part of the ability to span these differences and undermine some of this divisiveness that we feel so. That in an experiment, we could give participants, these were all white male participants, and they were going to interact with a couple of black guys about to talk to them about a topic, racially loaded topic like racial profiling. And what enabled them to relax and to move their chairs in close for that conversation was just the instruction. Look, nobody really knows how to have these conversations. They're kind of difficult. So don't go in and try to demonstrate that you're not prejudiced or something. That would just be a red flag. Don't do that. Just go in with a kind of a learning mindset that this is an opportunity to learn about another person and their lives, their conditions of life. And when in doubt, just ask questions. Don't make speeches. Just try to kindly learn about these people. Well, with that instruction, they were avid participants in
Yeah.
the conversation. So that tells me that there's an appetite for connection across identity divides. People want to be able to do that. They need a little concrete instruction, very simple instruction that would maybe empower them and enable them to do that. And then once they do it, I think they're going to find it a very rewarding kind of an experience. They're going to have a friend that's going to bring them something or be in a situation where they're going to learn something that
Right.
that would otherwise maybe not be so accessible to them. So I think the rewards of it, and I think if there's an appetite to do something, but there's no way to do it, then people pull back. But if there's an appetite to do something, and there is a set of pretty simple ways of proceeding, that can ignite people's interest.
That's right.
And so that's the hope.
Well, the book is called Churn. I enjoyed it greatly. It was written by a very wise man named Claude Steele, who is my guest today. We're about to wrap up this conversation with 7 questions. Claude, we call them the Live Inspired Seven.
Okay.
They tether all of my friends together. We've done about 1,000 interviews, my friends. So this is a safe land to walk on, but it's a bit of a sprint. So they're quick fire questions with quick answers. Here we go. Claude Steele, what's
Okay.
been the most impactful book you've ever read?
Johnny Tremaine. It got me, it got me to be a reader.
That's awesome. What's one positive characteristic or one beautiful trait that you possess as a child growing up in Chicago that you wish you exhibited as brilliantly today?
Sometimes you have nostalgia for your innocence as a child. And that innocence just enables you to put yourself in situations that
Awesome.
would be harder for you to do as an adult. So maybe that.
If your home caught fire, all living things, children, grandchildren, any animals you may have, all living things are out. You have an opportunity of running in and grabbing one item. What's the one physical thing you would save?
I had to answer that question. Oh, my late wife. I think I never got over that with her. We had to evacuate because the area behind us was on fire in
Wow.
California here, and so I ran in and got my computer and all of it, and as many of the books and papers I was working on as I could find. And she just couldn't believe that, and I so understand it. She went in and got all the family pictures and our fat dog and hustled them in the car, and here I am worried about my. So I guess that's a kind of shame-producing answer, but I couldn't but not tell that to that question.
Well, man, I told you before we went live, I had about 1,000 questions for you. One was going to be around August 27th, 1967,
Oh my
which
goodness.
I believe is the anniversary of a date where you said the words I do to
Yeah,
a lady named
yeah,
Dorothy.
yeah. My goodness, almost bring tears to my eyes. That was probably the most fortunate thing I had in life is marrying Dorothy Munson
Amen.
Steele, who passed away about 8 years ago. But we had a 50-year marriage of great and
I heard you
wonderful
loved
children
to
and
travel,
grandchildren. So yeah, so we
love traveling, love Paris, love
yeah we
music.
did. Wow, you have
Apparently, you like to
such wonderful.
barbecue. You make a mean set of ribs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now
Uh,
I wouldn't. I'm talking to a man from St. Louis, so who
the
knows
next
from
time you're in the
ribs?
area, man, we'll meet at the Arch. I'll pick you up and we'll have a bake off.
There we go. I'd love
If
that.
so, moving forward, if you could sit on a bench on a gorgeous day and have a long conversation with anyone, living or deceased, who do you want next to you?
Rambling in my head, James Baldwin comes to mind. I'd love to know more about him. I've just bought a new biography of his. I thought especially in his prime, in his early years, in his later years, I don't know, they got more complicated as they often do for people.
Right.
But I think some of his when he was a bit more innocent, and maybe the world was a bit more innocent. I think he wrote so
Agreed.
eloquently about life, more than certainly race, but it was all in the context of beautiful writing about life. And so he had some incredible talent, and that I think is still quite of contemporary value.
Fascinating guy.
Yeah,
And no one
fascinating.
else has ever shared him. But if our listeners have never heard of James Baldwin, they should do a little bit of research because he had a fascinating life. What's the best advice James or anyone else ever gave you? So the best advice you've ever received is,
I think the best advice that steadied me well throughout um, different stages of life and different challenges was that simple advice my father gave me of, the world ain't got to be perfect for you to get a job.
so good. What would you tell your 20-year-old self?
To be as open to different kind of experiences as you possibly can. The risk of growing into adulthood is that you're going to get so disciplined and rigorous about pursuing a livelihood and building a family and so on that you kind of close yourself off to outside things, and those outside things have always bounced me off of a plan into something more interesting.
Mm,
I would say that the things that I've been able to contribute as a scientist have that. None of the work I have contributed as a scientist came to me as some idea of mine. It always came to me by how other people reacted to things or the data that we were getting, and being open was the secret of being able to take advantage of those
that's
things.
good. Claude Steele, author, father, spouse, friend,
Okay.
example, wise friend. It has been said, this is the final question, that all great people, all wise people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like yours to read?
Love and openness.
Hmm.
Begin the day with that. Discipline, there's a book out called Discipline is Destiny. Yeah, discipline is really important in actually getting things done. But love and openness provides the groundwork for interesting and valuable life, I'd say.
A man who partied on the highest floors of the finest universities around the country and around the world reminds us of the power of love and openness to truly change society for good. Claude, I want to thank you for the work, for the wisdom, and for the example, man.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you and to your audience. As I said, I've been really looking forward to it. Yours is such an impressive life that I feel flattered to have been invited to join you in this conversation. Much appreciated.
Flattery will get you nowhere, Claude Steele. My friends, that is Claude. He is my friend. He's the author of Churn. My name is John O'Leary, and today is our day. What a gift. Live with your soul on fire. Well, friends and family like Claude Steele, I do truly believe that most of us want to get along with the full diversity of people in our lives. And yet, as he discussed today, the anxiety we feel in those interactions, it's real. But it doesn't have to divide us. When we choose to lean in and build trust and stay engaged, even when it's uncomfortable, we can create the possibility for something far bigger and something far better. If you enjoyed today's conversation, I think you'd love the conversation I had a couple years ago with Rabbi Susan Talve. As the founding rabbi of Central Reform Congregation, Susan has spent a lifetime showing up in divided spaces, listening intently, and building bridges where others see only barriers and walls. She'll share her faith. She'll talk with humility. She'll be courageous. You're going to love the conversation. It's available for you at episode 690, or just cruise with me right now over to johnolearyinspires.com/podcast. I'll have a link in the show notes for Susan's episode. Well, friends, we've made it to the end of this episode. I'm grateful for your attention. I'm grateful for your life. And I'm grateful that you know what I know to be true, that the foundation is firm, that God is still God. The headwind may be real, but the best is yet to come. So for this time, and until next time, my name is John O'Leary. Today is your day. Live with your soul on fire.